In the bustling city of Westbridge, a judge who believed she reigned unchallenged was about to discover just how fragile her empire truly was. People whispered about her iron grip, but no one dared imagine she could be toppled by the very system she once manipulated. Until one morning, when everything changed. For over a decade, Judge Alicia Bradford ruled from her elevated bench in Redwood County's grand courthouse like a queen in her throne room. Attorneys often described her as unflinching. Her unwavering stare and tendency to hand out maximum sentences made her both admired and feared. Some described her approach as tough love. She claimed her role was to maintain order, protect society, and ensure that criminals learn their lesson. You won't believe what happens next. Under that veneer of righteousness, rumors festered. Whispers circulated in hushed tones among defense lawyers and families who felt the weight of her gavel more intensely than most. They spoke of cases where the punishment seemed disproportionate to the crime, and the judged were often from marginalized communities. They murmured about side deals, questionable acquaintances, and suspiciously timed real estate investments that inexplicably coincided with her rulings. In coffee shops near the courthouse, legal interns swapped stories about closed-door chambers meetings that never made it onto any official record. Journalists tried to pursue leads about potential corruption, yet they always came up short. No paper trails, no recorded confessions. On the surface, Judge Bradford remained immaculate, a paragon of legal virtue in the eyes of the public. At least, that's what everyone believed. Brace yourself for this. On a bright Monday morning, the Redwood County Courthouse buzzed with its usual symphony of footsteps, paper shuffling, and faint murmurs. The sound of lawyers chatting with clients blended into the background hum of the day's work. Judge Bradford sat at the bench, meticulously polished nails tapping a muted rhythm on the wooden surface. She flicked through files with an air of practiced indifference, as though each case presented was no more than a name on paper. At the front, a well-dressed man named Daryl Mitchell stood in silence. He wore a crisp charcoal suit and exuded the kind of quiet confidence that, in most courtrooms, might command respect. Yet to Judge Bradford, he was just another defendant. It didn't matter that he looked poised enough to lead a board meeting, he was still on the wrong side of the bench, and in her eyes, that meant he stood at a lower rung of society. Without offering him so much as a direct glance, she picked up the file that supposedly bore his name. "Mr. Mitchell," she began, the faintest smirk curving her lips. "Let me guess, you're here to claim you've been wronged?" Her tone brimmed with practiced sarcasm, echoing a deep-rooted assumption that he was just another desperate individual trying to skirt responsibility. "Hold on, because it's about to get better." A few muffled laughs rose from the gallery, fueling Bradford's confidence. Even the bailiff, Officer Grant, a man as imposing in stature as he was loyal to the judge, allowed himself a small, knowing grin. The prosecutor of the day, Janine Carter, was more reserved but harbored her own slight smile, perhaps anticipating an easy win. Bradford's court was known for swift, merciless verdicts, and hardly anyone thought this day would be any different. Daryl Mitchell stood unflinching. He looked around, as if carefully observing how every person in that courtroom played their part in the judge's show. In the sudden lull after her remark, he chose to speak. "Your Honor," he said softly, letting his words settle, "I'm not here as a defendant." When he uttered that single sentence, "I'm not here as a defendant," the room seemed to draw a collective breath. Judge Bradford's mocking expression froze in place. She glanced at the file in her hand, then back at Mitchell. "Excuse me," she said, her voice coated with skepticism. The gallery fell silent, straining to catch every syllable of what would come next. "I'm actually here because I brought this case to you," he clarified, his tone calm and measured. He slid his hand into his inner pocket, prompting a ripple of tension among the bailiff and the prosecutor. People shifted uneasily, not knowing what he'd pull out. But when it emerged, the polished sheen of a federal badge glinted under the fluorescent lights. For an instant, no one moved. No one even seemed to breathe. Officers, lawyers, and curious spectators all stared at the badge, the name Department of Financial Integrity clearly visible across the top. Then came the hushed gasps, a sign that the crowd realized something monumental was happening. Daryl Mitchell was no ordinary man on trial. He was an undercover investigator, and his mission had led him directly into Judge Bradford's courtroom. Calmly, Mitchell turned to address the judge. "I've been investigating allegations of judicial corruption, Your Honor," he stated. "Your name appeared multiple times in the course of my work." The silence gave way to scattered exclamations and a wave of murmurs that swelled like an oncoming tide. The bailiff took a tentative step forward, unsure whether to protect the judge or to back away from the unknown threat standing at the front of the courtroom. As for Judge Bradford, her face flashed with indignation. She wasn't accustomed to being taken off guard, especially not in her own domain. "This is ridiculous," she snapped, a break in her typically composed facade. "I don't know what you think you're doing, but you have no authority here." Yet even she knew that was a desperate lie. A federal investigation trumped any local judge's commands. Mitchell stepped forward methodically, placing a thick folder on the bench in front of her. "These documents," he explained, "detail multiple financial transactions tied to your bank accounts and shell companies that connect to private prison contractors. We also have an extensive record of disproportionate sentences given to defendants from certain demographics." He paused, letting that sink in. "Needless to say, it raises serious questions about your impartiality." Judge Bradford's hand trembled ever so slightly as she gingerly opened the folder. Page after page of banking statements, sworn affidavits, and depositions painted a damning picture: money funneling into offshore accounts, cross-referenced with cases where the defendants received maximum penalties. Also included were internal emails from corporations that profited from prison labor, praising Bradford for her consistent tough-on-crime approach. In that moment, the power in the room shifted tangibly. The judge, who had always looked down on everyone below her bench, now seemed small and cornered. Her face lost its color, the blood draining away as if each document were a fresh dagger to her credibility. The prosecutor, Janine Carter, peered over the judge's shoulder, her initial confidence evaporating. The bailiff, Officer Grant, hovered uncertainly, caught between loyalty to Bradford and a duty to uphold the law. Whispers spread in the gallery, disbelief mingling with the beginnings of outrage. The once impenetrable aura surrounding Judge Bradford cracked, revealing a complicated tangle of deceit beneath the surface. People looked at one another, recalling old rumors that they had dismissed as mere gossip. Now, each speculation seemed all too possible, if not outright confirmed. Before Judge Bradford could mount a defense, the doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. Two men in dark suits stepped in quietly, federal marshals. Right behind them strode Assistant U.S. Attorney Leon Caldwell, a figure well known in Westbridge for tackling high-profile corruption cases. He walked with measured steps, as though he had choreographed this moment long in advance. Caldwell's voice carried authority that rivaled Bradford's. He addressed her directly: "Judge Alicia Bradford, under the directives of an ongoing federal investigation, you are hereby relieved of your duties, effective immediately. Further legal proceedings against you will follow." A stunned hush fell over the room once more, but this time it felt even heavier. Bradford's eyes darted from Mitchell to Caldwell, then to the marshals stepping closer. She opened her mouth, yet no sound emerged, an uncharacteristic moment of helplessness for a woman who had spent years deciding other people's fates. She gripped the gavel like a lifeline, but what good was a wooden hammer when federal law demanded you step down? The murmur from the gallery surged into a wave of reactions. Some people shook their heads, disappointed but unsurprised. Others looked downright furious, convinced that they or someone they knew might have been personally wronged by the judge's corruption. Bradford's longtime supporters, clerks, fellow judges, and local politicians were nowhere in sight to shield her from this public humiliation. Officer Grant, shifting uneasily by the bench, seemed at war with himself. But protocol was clear: if the federal government has a warrant or an order, local court officials must comply. After a moment's hesitation, he stepped aside, allowing the marshals to approach Judge Bradford. She tried to maintain her composure, but the humiliation was evident in the set of her jaw and the widening of her eyes. One of the marshals glanced at her. "Judge Bradford, please come with us," he said, voice firm yet respectful. Everyone in the room recognized the irony. A person who'd sent countless defendants away was now facing the same fate, albeit on a different level. With the doors swinging shut behind Judge Bradford and the federal marshals, the tension in the courtroom refused to dissipate. It felt as though the whole space took one collective breath, like they were emerging from underwater, unsure what to do now that the unthinkable had happened. Outside, curious onlookers clustered near the entrance, straining to see the arrested judge who once struck fear into so many hearts. Daryl Mitchell remained by the defendant's table, a symbol of the new order taking root in Redwood County. He met Assistant U.S. Attorney Leon Caldwell's gaze, and they exchanged a firm nod. The real work had only just begun. Mitchell knew well that Bradford was merely one piece in a larger puzzle of corruption. The financial statements pointed to an even more intricate network involving other judges, local politicians, and private prison corporations. It was a sobering thought. If Judge Bradford had succeeded in evading detection for so many years, what about the rest of them? How many other officials might be quietly accepting bribes, funneling money, or skewing justice for personal benefit? One judge going down wouldn't cleanse the entire system, but it was a start, one that people would remember for a long time to come. In the back of the courtroom, attorneys huddled, talking in low voices. Some had pending cases that Bradford was overseeing. Others wondered aloud if older rulings might be overturned, opening the floodgates for appeals. Meanwhile, families who'd lost loved ones to lengthy prison sentences under Bradford's hammer felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps, at last, they'd get a fair hearing or a chance for review. As soon as word of Bradford's removal spread beyond the courthouse walls, media trucks and reporters scrambled for the story. A circle of cameras, microphones, and anxious faces formed near the main entrance. Judge Alicia Bradford under federal investigation read the headlines that started popping up on local news websites. Social media, always quick to react, lit up with hashtags like #JudicialCorruption and #BradfordExposed. Commentators debated the implications on live broadcasts. Some pinned the blame squarely on Bradford, calling her an outlier who was rotten to the core. Others insisted that this was a symptom of a deeper, more systemic problem: the entire structure of for-profit prisons, campaign donations, and behind-the-scenes horse trading. It wasn't about one bad judge, it was about a flawed system that allowed her to flourish in the first place. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse, chanting slogans against corrupt officials. Some held up signs demanding a full audit of all Bradford's cases. Others demanded the resignation of any politician who had previously endorsed her. The pressure for sweeping reforms grew, and local officials scrambled to issue statements distancing themselves from the disgraced judge. Amid the chaos, Daryl Mitchell slipped quietly through the throng of reporters. Leon Caldwell followed close behind, offering only a curt no comment to the bombardment of questions. A few persistent journalists tried to corner Mitchell, but he politely declined to provide details, pointing out that an ongoing investigation restricted what he could reveal. Still, the atmosphere around them was electric, the kind of electricity that signals something important has just shifted in society's collective awareness. By late afternoon, the courthouse halls had mostly emptied. A few stragglers lingered, swapping stories of Judge Bradford's past rulings. Some were outraged, others validated by the day's events. Everywhere, people felt the tremors of a seismic shift. A judge who once seemed invincible was now facing the very justice she had manipulated for years. Daryl Mitchell removed his jacket, draping it over his arm as he stepped into the crisp outdoor air. He glanced back at the imposing courthouse. It no longer looked as formidable as it once had, perhaps because one of its staunchest defenders of the status quo had been removed in front of everyone's eyes. Leon Caldwell caught up to him on the steps. They stood there for a moment, taking in the camera flashes and the excited buzz of spectators. "I imagine more dominoes will fall," Caldwell observed. "We have enough leads to keep us busy for months." Mitchell nodded. "The deeper we go, the more we'll find. It's not just about Bradford. It's about every official who profited from her rulings. And we're going to keep following that trail." Beyond the swirling cameras and the demands for comment, the people of Westbridge were left to grapple with the truth: corruption isn't always obvious, and power can create illusions of invulnerability. Bradford's story served as a harsh reminder that the real victim of corruption isn't just the law, but also the countless individuals who suffered under its abuse. Yet, in exposing her, a door of accountability had swung wide open. New questions would be asked, new investigations launched, and hopefully, new precautions put in place. If one judge could be taken down, maybe the next one would think twice before bending the rules for money or influence. Judge Alicia Bradford's fall from grace isn't just a story about one corrupt official. It symbolizes a larger struggle, a reminder that justice can't be sold to the highest bidder without consequences. In the end, the highest seat in a courtroom is still subject to the people and the laws it's supposed to uphold. What about you? Have you ever encountered situations where someone in power seemed utterly untouchable, yet you suspected something was off? How many lives do you think were quietly harmed by Bradford's decisions before today's turning point? Let's talk about it in the comments. Share your stories of witnessing injustice or your thoughts on how a system can be reshaped for the better. And if you believe in the power of shedding light on hidden truths, make sure to like this video, share it with someone who needs to see it, and subscribe to stay updated on more stories that challenge the status quo. Remember, no one is above the law. The moment we stop questioning power is the moment it starts corrupting the very foundation of justice. Today, Westbridge saw a moment of reckoning. Tomorrow, it could be your city. Stay vigilant, stay informed, and never forget, the only way to defeat the darkness is to shine a light into its deepest corners. If you like our stories, please subscribe, like and share. We'll be back soon with another story of justice served.